Archer West had built his tech empire from nothing, but he'd forgotten what it felt like to be powerless. That changed when he found 7-year-old Miles Ortega curled up alone at a freezing bus stop at midnight. The boy's mother had missed the last bus after working a double shift, and Miles was waiting in the cold, trusting she'd come back for him. What Archer did next didn't just warm one little boy's heart. It uncovered a connection that would rewrite both their futures. The woman who raised Miles alone while working 3 jobs was the same person who had saved Archer's failing startup 15 years earlier with a single act of kindness. But could a chance encounter on a cold night bridge the gap between 2 worlds that seemed impossibly far apart? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The rain had stopped, but the November wind still cut through downtown Seattle like a blade. Archer West pulled his charcoal wool coat tighter as he walked the empty streets, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. At 42, he was worth more than most small countries' GDP, but tonight he felt as hollow as the abandoned storefronts lining Pine Street. His penthouse apartment waited 20 floors above, complete with heated floors and a view that real estate agents called priceless. Yet he found himself walking these streets instead of heading home. The quarterly board meeting had ended 3 hours ago. Another session where shareholders praised his vision while treating him like a machine designed solely to generate profit. Archer had built quantum solutions from a cramped garage into a technology giant that employed over 50,000 people worldwide. But success had come at a cost he was only beginning to understand. The company's latest neural interface technology would revolutionize how humans interacted with computers, but the achievement felt empty when he had no one to share it with. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the wet pavement as he passed the old metro bus stop on 3rd Avenue. The shelter was one of those aging metal and glass structures that the city had promised to replace for years but never quite got around to funding. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting an uneven glow across the cracked concrete. That's when he saw the small figure curled up on the bench. At first, Archer thought it might be a pile of discarded clothing or a homeless person's belongings. But as he moved closer, he could make out the shape of a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a thin blue jacket that looked like it belonged to someone twice his size. The boy's dark hair was matted against his forehead, and his small hands were tucked between his knees in a futile attempt to stay warm. Archer stopped walking. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to call social services from the safety of his car, to handle this situation the way his lawyers and publicists would advise. Getting directly involved with a homeless child could create complications, liability issues, media attention he didn't need. But something about the boy's stillness, the way he seemed to trust that someone would eventually come for him, made Archer's chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. He approached the bench slowly, not wanting to startle the child. Up close, he could see that the boy wasn't homeless in the way Archer had initially assumed. His clothes were clean but worn, his sneakers were scuffed but tied properly, and there was a small backpack beside him that looked like it contained school supplies. This wasn't abandonment, Archer realized. This was a child waiting for someone who hadn't come. The boy stirred as Archer's shadow fell across the bench. Dark eyes opened, alert but not afraid, and Archer found himself looking into a face that held more patience than most adults he knew. The child sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "Hi," the boy said simply, his voice carrying a slight accent that Archer couldn't quite place. "Are you waiting for the bus too?" Archer glanced at the digital display above the shelter. The last bus had departed 47 minutes ago, and the next one wouldn't arrive until 5:30 in the morning. "I think we might have missed it," he said, settling onto the bench beside the boy. The metal was cold even through his expensive coat, and he couldn't imagine how long this child had been sitting here in just a thin jacket. "That's okay," the boy replied with a shrug that seemed far too mature for his age. "My mom will come get me when she can. She's working late again, but she always comes back." The simple faith in those words hit Archer harder than any business setback ever had. This child, sitting alone in the cold at midnight, had more trust in the people who mattered to him than Archer had felt in anyone for years. "What's your name?" Archer asked. "Miles," the boy said, then added as an afterthought, "Miles Ortega. I'm 7 3/4." "I'm Archer," he replied, leaving off his last name. In this moment, his corporate identity felt irrelevant. "How long have you been waiting here, Miles?" Miles pulled a small digital watch from his pocket, the kind that came free with kids' meals at fast food restaurants. "Since about 9:30, I think. Mom got called in for an extra shift at the hospital, and she said she'd pick me up after school care closed, but her supervisor made her stay late. She tried to call a taxi, but they said it would be 2 hours, and she didn't want me waiting outside the school that long." Archer did the math in his head. Miles had been sitting here for nearly 3 hours. "Aren't you cold?" "A little," Miles admitted, then brightened. "But Mom taught me this trick. If you think really hard about something warm, like hot chocolate or sitting by the fireplace at Christmas, you don't feel the cold as much. Want to try it?" The suggestion was so earnest, so utterly innocent, that Archer found himself nodding. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the last time he'd felt truly warm, not just physically, but emotionally. The memory that came to him was unexpected, from 15 years ago when he'd been on the verge of losing everything. He'd been 27 then, working 18-hour days in a shared workspace that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. Quantum Solutions was just an idea scribbled on napkins and coded in a basement apartment he shared with 2 roommates. The venture capital firm that had initially shown interest had pulled out at the last minute, leaving him with 3 days to make payroll and no clear path forward. He'd been sitting in a 24-hour diner at 2 in the morning, staring at a cup of coffee he couldn't afford to refill, when the waitress had approached his table. She was young, maybe his age, with kind eyes and a tired smile that suggested she understood what it felt like to be at the end of your rope. "Rough night?" she'd asked, refilling his cup without being asked. "Rough year," he'd replied, then found himself telling her everything. About the startup, the failed funding, the fact that he'd have to let his small team go and probably move back in with his parents. She'd listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking a question that showed she was really paying attention. When he'd finished talking, she disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a slice of apple pie. "On the house," she'd said. "And for what it's worth, I think you're going to figure this out. You've got that look." "What look?" "What?" "Look. The look of someone who doesn't give up. Trust me, I've seen enough people at their lowest point to recognize the ones who bounce back." Her name tag had read Marina, and she'd given him something more valuable than money that night. She'd given him hope when he'd run out of it himself. 2 days later, he'd pitched his idea to a different group of investors, this time with the confidence that came from having someone believe in him. The rest, as they said, was history. "Did it work?" Miles asked, pulling Archer back to the present. "Yeah," Archer said, surprised to find that he actually did feel warmer. "It worked." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the occasional car pass by on the empty street. Archer found himself studying Miles more closely. The boy had his mother's eyes, he realized, though he couldn't quite place where he'd seen those eyes before. There was something familiar about the shape of Miles's face, the way he held himself with quiet dignity despite his circumstances. "My mom says I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," Miles said suddenly. "But you seem nice, and you're not trying to get me to go anywhere, so I think it's okay." "Your mom sounds smart," Archer replied. "She's taught you well." "She's the smartest person I know," Miles said with absolute certainty. "She works 3 jobs to take care of us, and she's going to school at night to become a nurse. She already knows how to do lots of medical stuff because she works at the hospital, but she wants to get her degree so she can help people even more. The pride in Miles' voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a child making excuses for an absent parent. This was a boy who genuinely admired his mother's strength and sacrifice. Archer felt a twinge of something he couldn't quite name, perhaps envy for the kind of unconditional love and respect Miles had for his mother. "What about your dad?" Archer asked gently. Miles's expression grew more serious. "He died when I was 4. He was a soldier, and he got hurt in Afghanistan. Mom says he was brave and that he loved me very much, but I don't remember him as much as I want to." The matter-of-fact way Miles delivered this information made Archer's throat tighten. This child had already faced more loss and hardship than many adults ever would. Yet he sat here with patience and optimism, trusting that his mother would come for him. "I'm sorry," Archer said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. "It's okay," Miles replied. "Mom says that sometimes sad things happen, but that doesn't mean we stop believing in good things. She says Dad would want us to be happy and to help other people when we can." A car turned onto 3rd Avenue, and both Archer and Miles looked up hopefully. But it was just a delivery truck making its late-night rounds, and they settled back into their shared wait. Archer checked his phone, noting that it was nearly 12:30. He thought about the warm bed waiting for him, the heated garage where his BMW sat protected from the sauce. Elements. The full refrigerator and well-stocked bar in his apartment. "Miles," he said carefully, "would you like me to call someone for you? Maybe there's another family member or friend who could come get you?" Miles shook his head. "There's just me and Mom. She doesn't have any family here. They're all back in Mexico. And we don't really know our neighbors that well. Mom says it's because we move a lot, whenever the rent goes up or she finds a better job." The casual way Miles described their instability made Archer's chest ache. He was starting to understand that this wasn't just a child waiting for a late ride. This was a glimpse into a life where uncertainty was the norm, where a missed bus could mean hours of waiting in the cold because there were no other options. "What if I drove you home?" Archer offered. "I have a car, and I'd be happy to make sure you get there safely." Miles considered this seriously, tilting his head as he thought it through. "Mom says I shouldn't get in cars with strangers, but she also says I should use good judgment. You've been sitting here with me for a while, and you haven't tried to trick me or anything. Plus, you're wearing a really nice coat, so you're probably not a bad person." The logic was adorable and heartbreaking at the same time. "How do you figure that?" "Bad people don't usually dress nice," Miles explained with the confidence of someone who'd given this considerable thought. "At tea. Least, that's what I've noticed. The people who are mean to Mom at work or try to cheat us at the store, they usually look messy or angry. You look like you take care of yourself, so you probably take care of other people too." Archer was simultaneously impressed by Miles' observational skills and horrified by the fact that a 7-year-old had developed such survival instincts. "That's very smart thinking," he said. "But you know what? Let me call your mom first and ask her permission. That way, she'll know exactly who I am and where we're going." Miles brightened at this suggestion. "That's a good idea. She's probably worried sick about me by now." He pulled a small flip phone from his backpack, the kind of basic device that could make calls and send texts, but not much else. "This is her work number. She's probably in between patients right now." Archer dialed the number, feeling strangely nervous. How do you explain to a mother that you found her child alone at a bus stop at midnight? How do you offer help without sounding like you're passing judgment on her parenting? The phone rang 3 times before a breathless voice answered. "Hello? Is this Marina Ortega?" Archer asked. "Yes, who is this? Is Miles okay?" The panic in her voice was immediate and sharp. "Miles is fine," Archer said quickly. "He's safe. My name is Archer, and I found him waiting at the bus stop on 3rd Avenue. He told me you were working late and that you'd come get him when you could." There was a long pause, followed by what sounded like a suppressed sob. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry." "I'm a nurse at Harborview, and we had a multi-car accident come in just as I was leaving. I've been trying to get away for the past 2 hours, but every time I head for the door, another ambulance arrives." "Is he worn? Is he scared?" "He's okay," Archer assured her. "He's been very patient and very brave. I was wondering if you'd be comfortable with me driving him home. I can wait with you on the phone while I do it, so you know exactly where we are." Another pause. "I don't know you," Marina said, her voice tight with the impossible choice between trusting a stranger and leaving her son alone in the cold for potentially hours more. "Mom?" Miles took the phone from Archer. "This is Miles. The nice man has been sitting with me for a while, and he hasn't done anything scary. He even did the warm thinking exercise with me. I think it's okay." Archer could hear Marina's voice on the other end, speaking rapidly in a mix of English and Spanish. Miles responded in both languages, his tone reassuring and mature. After a few minutes, he handed the phone back to Braid. "Archer, she wants to talk to you again," Miles said. "I'm sorry," Marina said when Archer took the phone. "This is not how I wanted to handle this. I tried to call everyone I could think of, but none of my coworkers can leave, and I don't have anyone else to call." "You don't need to apologize," Archer said. "These things happen. The important thing is that Miles is safe and that we get him home warm." "He told me you seem trustworthy," Marina said. "And honestly, I don't have a lot of options right now. If you're willing to drive him home, I would be incredibly grateful. I can give you my address, and I'll call you every 10 minutes to check in." "That sounds like a good plan," Archer agreed. "And Marina? Miles is an incredible kid. You should be very proud." "I am," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's everything to me." After getting the address and Marina's personal phone number, Archer ended the call and looked at Miles. "Ready to go home?" Miles nodded eagerly, shouldering his backpack. "I can't wait to see Mom. She's probably been worried sick." Archer's car was parked in the executive garage of his office building, just 3 blocks away. As they walked, Miles chattered about school, his favorite subjects, the book he was reading, and his hope that his mom would be able to come to his school's winter concert next month. The normalcy of it all, the way Miles could shift from waiting patiently in the cold to excited chatter about everyday 7-year old concerns, struck Archer as remarkably resilient. The parking garage was empty, except for a security guard who nodded respectfully as they passed. Archer's car, a sleek black BMW, looked almost absurd in the context of the evening's events. Miles whistled low as he approached it. "This is a really nice car," he said, running his hand along the smooth paint. "It must have cost a lot of money." "It did," Archer admitted, opening the passenger door for Miles. "But you know what? It's not nearly as interesting as the conversation I've had tonight." As they drove through the quiet streets, Archer found himself seeing the city differently. They passed the upscale neighborhoods where he usually spent his time, filled with restored Victorian houses and trendy restaurants that charged $50 for a steak. But as they continued west, the landscape changed. The houses became smaller, many with bars on the windows and small front yards that had been converted to parking spaces. Miles directed him to a narrow street lined with apartment buildings that had seen better decades. They stopped in front of a 3-story complex with faded yellow siding and a sign that advertised month-to-month rentals. It wasn't the worst neighborhood Archer had ever seen, but it was clearly a place where people lived because they had to, not because they wanted to. "That's ours," Miles said, pointing to a window on the second floor where a small Christmas tree was visible through thin curtains. "Mom always puts up decorations early because she says it makes the place feel more like home." Archer parked the car and looked up at the building. The thought of Miles and his mother living here, worrying about rent increases and relying on public transportation, made something twist in his chest. He'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd forgotten what it felt like to worry about basic necessities. "Thank you for driving me home," Miles said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "And thank you for waiting with me. It was a lot less scary with you there." "You're welcome," Archer replied. "And Miles, you weren't scary at all. You were brave." As they walked up the stairs to the second floor, Archer could hear the sound of a television from one apartment and a baby crying from another. The hallway smelled like cooking oil and old carpet, but Miles seemed completely at ease, fishing a key from his backpack and unlocking the door marked 2B. The apartment was small but clean, with a living room that doubled as a study area. Textbooks were stacked on a folding table next to a couch that looked like it had been rescued from a thrift store. The walls were covered with Miles' artwork and certificates from school, and the small kitchen was organized with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to waste anything. "Mom won't be home for a few hours," Miles said, hanging his jacket on a hook by the door. "She said she'd call to check on me, but she's probably really busy. Do you want some hot chocolate? I know how to make it in the microwave." The offer was so genuine, so eager to repay kindness with kindness, that Archer found himself nodding. "That sounds perfect." As Miles busied himself in the kitchen, Archer looked around the apartment more carefully. On the refrigerator, held up by colorful magnets, were Miles' report cards showing straight A's, a schedule of Marina's work shifts, and a photo of a young man in military uniform. The man had Miles' eyes and smile, and Archer realized he was looking at the boy's father. "That's my dad," Miles said, noticing Archer's attention. "His name was Carlos. Mom says I look like him, but I think I look more like her." "You look like both of them," Archer said gently. "That's how families work." Miles handed him a mug of hot chocolate, the kind made from powder that came in packets. It was too sweet and not quite hot enough, but Archer couldn't remember the last time anything had tasted better. They sat on the couch together, and Miles pulled out a photo album from the coffee table. "Mom made this for me," he said, opening it to the first page. "She wanted me to remember our story, even the parts that were hard." The album chronicled their life together, from photos of Miles as a baby with both parents to more recent pictures of just him and Marina. There were images from birthday parties held in this same small living room, school events where Marina was the only parent in scrubs because she'd come straight from work, and quiet moments of them reading together or decorating for holidays. "Mom takes a picture every month," Miles explained, "so we can remember how we've grown. She says that even when things are tough, we're still building something beautiful together." As they flipped through the pages, Archer began to notice something familiar about Marina's face in the photos. There was something about her smile, the way she held her head, that tugged at his memory. By the time they reached the most recent photos, he was certain he'd seen her before, but he couldn't place where. "Miles," he said carefully, "has your mom ever worked at a restaurant, maybe as a waitress?" Miles looked up from the album, surprised by the question. "Yeah, she used to work at Mel's Diner downtown. That was before she got the job at the hospital. She worked there for like 3 years. Mostly night shifts. She said the tips were better after midnight because people were either really happy or really sad, and both kinds of people tip well." Archer's heart began to race. Mel's Diner had closed 5 years ago, but 15 years ago, it had been the 24-hour place where he'd spent countless late nights working on his laptop and drinking coffee he couldn't afford to refill. The memory of the waitress who'd given him pie and hope came flooding back with startling clarity. "Miles," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think I knew your mom a long time ago." Before Miles could respond, Archer's phone rang. It was Marina, calling to check on them as promised. Archer answered quickly, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just realized. "Hi, it's Archer," he said. "Miles is home safe. We're having hot chocolate." "Thank you so much," Marina said, the relief evident in her voice. "I can't tell you how grateful I am. I should be able to leave here in about an hour, maybe less if things quiet down." "Marina," Archer said, his pulse quickening. "I know this might sound strange, but did you ever work at Mel's Diner about 15 years ago?" There was a pause. "Yes, I did. Why do you ask?" "I think we met once," Archer said. "You served me coffee and pie at 2 in the morning. I was working on a business plan, and I was about to give up on everything. You told me I had the look of someone who doesn't give up." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Archer wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Marina spoke, her voice barely audible. "Archer," she whispered. "Archer West. The computer guy with the big dreams and the empty wallet." "That's me," he said, amazed that she remembered. "Oh my God," Marina breathed. "I can't believe it. I wondered what happened to you. I always hoped you'd figured things out." "I did," Archer said, looking around the small apartment and thinking about his penthouse 20 miles away. "I figured it out." Miles had been listening to the conversation with growing confusion. "Mom, do you know Archer?" "Yes, baby," Marina said, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew him a long time ago, before you were born. He was going through a really hard time, and I guess I tried to help him a little bit." "She did more than try," Archer said. "Marina, what you did that night, what you said to me, it changed everything. I went back to those investors with the confidence you gave me, and they funded my company. Everything I've built, everything I've accomplished, it started with that night and that slice of pie." "I can't believe this is real," Marina said. "Of all the people in the world, you're the one who found Miles tonight." "I don't think it's a coincidence," Archer said, surprising himself with the admission. "I think maybe the universe has a sense of humor." They talked for a few more minutes, with Marina promising to call when she left the hospital, and Archer assuring her that he'd stay with Miles until she got home. When he hung up, Miles was staring at him with wide eyes. "You're famous, aren't you?" Miles said. "That's why Mom recognized your name." "I'm not famous exactly," Archer said. "But I do run a pretty big company." "The computer company Mom mentioned?" "That's right. It's called Quantum Solutions. We make technology that helps people." Miles considered this information seriously. "So you're rich?" I am," Archer admitted. "But you sat with me at the bus stop anyway," Miles said. "Even though you didn't have to." "Especially because I didn't have to," Archer replied. "The things we choose to do, not the things we have to do, those are what matter." They spent the next hour looking through more of Miles' photo albums and talking about school, books, and the science project Miles was working on for his second-grade class. Archer found himself more engaged in conversation than he'd been in months of board meetings and investor calls. Miles had a curiosity about the world that was infectious, and a way of asking questions that made Archer think about things he'd never considered. "Why do you think people help each other?" Miles asked at one point. "Like, why did you stop to help me? And why did Mom help you all those years ago?" Archer thought about it for a long time before answering. "I think maybe because when we help someone else, we're really helping ourselves too. We're proving that we're the kind of people we want to be." "That's a good answer," Miles said approvingly. "Mom always says that helping people is like planting seeds. You might not see the flowers right away, but they'll grow eventually." When Marina's key turned in the lock at nearly 2 in the morning, both Archer and Miles were still awake, deep in conversation about whether robots would ever be able to feel emotions. Marina burst through the door still wearing her hospital scrubs, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face exhausted but determined. She stopped short when she saw Archer, as if she couldn't quite believe he was really there. He stood up from the couch, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look in his expensive suit in their modest living room. "Marina, he said simply. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled him into a hug that caught him completely off guard. It was the kind of embrace that came from deep gratitude and genuine affection, and Archer realized it had been months since anyone had hugged him like they actually meant it. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for taking care of him." When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. Up close, Archer could see the girl from the diner in her face. But she was older now, marked by years of struggle and responsibility. She was still beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty, one that came from strength and sacrifice rather than youth. "Mom," Miles said, bouncing up from the couch, "guess what? Archer is the computer guy you helped at the diner, the one with the big dreams." Marina looked back at Archer with wonder. "I can't believe it's really you. Look at you, all grown up and successful. I'm so proud of you." The simple statement hit Archer like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of him? His parents had died in a car accident 8 years ago, before Quantum Solutions had become truly successful. He'd built an empire, but he'd built it alone, with no one to share the victories or the failures. "I need to tell you something," Archer said. "What you did for me that night, it wasn't just the pie or the coffee. It was the fact that you saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You gave me hope when I was completely out of it. I've never forgotten that." Marina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I remember that night so clearly. You looked so lost, but there was something about you that made me think you were going to figure it out. I just wanted to give you a little push in the right direction." "That little push changed my life," Archer said. "And now I'd like to return the favor." Marina frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'd like to offer you a job," Archer said. "A real job, with benefits and security and a future. You're clearly brilliant, you're organized, you're hardworking, and you understand people. I could use someone like you at Quantum Solutions." Marina's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Archer, that's incredibly generous, but I'm not qualified for a job at a tech company. I'm still working on my nursing degree, and I don't know anything about computers or business." "You know about taking care of people," Archer said. "You know about working under pressure and solving problems and making hard decisions. Those are the skills that matter most. The technical stuff can be taught. But I can't just abandon my nursing program," Marina said. "I'm so close to finishing, and it's been my dream for years." "You wouldn't have to abandon it," Archer said. "We could work around your school schedule. Or better yet, we could pay for you to finish your degree while you work for us. We have educational assistance programs." Miles had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement. "Mom, this could be the answer to everything. Remember how you always say that sometimes good things happen when you least expect them?" Marina looked at her son, then back at Archer. "What kind of job are you talking about?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," Archer admitted. "But I know I want you to be part of what we're building. Maybe you could start in our human resources department, helping us take better care of our employees. Or maybe you could work with our community outreach programs. The specific title doesn't matter as much as having you there." End quote. "This is crazy," Marina said, but she was smiling. "This whole night is crazy. A few hours ago, I was panicking about how to get to my son, and now you're offering me a job at one of the biggest companies in the city." "Sometimes crazy is good," Archer said. "Sometimes crazy is exactly what we need." Over the next hour, they talked about the practicalities. Archer explained that the job would come with a salary that was more than Marina currently made from all 3 of her jobs combined, plus health insurance, paid vacation, and tuition assistance. Marina asked careful questions about the company culture, the expectations, and whether she'd be able to maintain her work-life balance with Miles. "The thing is," Marina said finally, "I need to be honest with you. I can't afford to take a risk that doesn't work out. Miles depends on me, and I can't gamble with his security. I understand, Archer said. How about this? Why don't you come in for a trial period? A month, maybe 2. If it doesn't work out for any reason, I'll make sure you have enough severance to cover your expenses while you find something else. And if it does work out? Marina asked. Then we'll figure out the next step together, Archer said. I'm not just offering you a job, Marina. I'm offering you a partnership, a chance to help me build something that matters. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted from business to personal. Marina told Archer about her life since the diner, about meeting and marrying Carlos, about the challenges of raising Miles alone after Carlos's death. Archer shared his own journey, the successes and failures, the loneliness that came with being at the top of an industry that moved too fast for lasting relationships. You know what I realized tonight? Archer said, as dawn began to lighten the sky outside. I've been so focused on building a company that I forgot to build a life. I have everything I thought I wanted, but I don't have anyone to share it with. Success isn't worth much if you're experiencing it alone, Marina. Agreed. But it's never too late to change that. Miles had fallen asleep on the couch during their conversation, curled up under a blanket that Marina had draped over him. Looking at the boy's peaceful face, Archer felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he was thinking about the future in terms of people rather than profits. Marina, he said quietly, I want to ask you something else, something that has nothing to do with the job offer. Okay, she said, curious. What would it take for you and Miles to never have to worry about money again? Not just having enough, but having more than enough. Having security and options and the freedom to make choices based on what you want rather than what you can afford. Marina stared at him. Why are you asking me that? Because I've been thinking about it all night, Archer said. About what it means to really help someone, not just offer them a job or a temporary solution, but to actually change their circumstances permanently. Archer, you've already done more than enough. The job offer alone is life-changing. But it's not enough for me, Archer said. It doesn't balance the scales. You saved my life 15 years ago, in a very real way. You gave me the confidence to keep going when I was ready to quit. Everything I have, everything I've built, it exists because of that moment. A job offer doesn't come close to repaying that debt. You don't owe me anything, Marina protested. What I did was basic human kindness. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Archer said firmly. Not anyone. Most people would have kept their heads down, served the coffee, and minded their own business. You chose to see me, to really see me, and to give me exactly what I needed at exactly the right moment. That's not common, Marina. That's rare and precious and worth more than you know." End quote. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Finally, Marina spoke. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that I buy you a house," Archer said. "Not a loan, not a mortgage you'd have to pay back, but a gift. A real home for you and Miles, somewhere stable where you never have to worry about rent increases or eviction notices." Marina's face went pale. "Archer, that's impossible. I can't accept something like that." "Why not?" he asked. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What good is it doing sitting in investment accounts? At least this way, it would mean something." "Because it's too much," Marina said, her voice shaking. "Because I didn't help you that night expecting anything in return. Because accepting something that big would change who I am." "How would it change who you are?" Marina struggled to find the words. "I've always been independent. Even when Carlos was alive, I insisted on contributing equally to our household. After he died, I swore I'd never be dependent on anyone else again. I'd rather work 3 jobs and live in a tiny apartment than have someone else pay my way." This isn't about dependence, Archer said gently. This is about gratitude. This is about one person recognizing that another person changed their life and wanting to acknowledge that in a meaningful way. Miles stirred on the couch, and both adults immediately lowered their voices. The boy opened his eyes and looked around, momentarily confused about where he was and why there was a strange man in his living room. Then memory returned, and he sat up with a smile. "Is it morning already?" he asked. "Almost," Marina said, smoothing his hair. "How did you sleep?" "Good. I had a dream that we lived in a big house with a yard where I could play catch and maybe have a dog." Miles looked at Archer curiously. "Were you and Mom talking about something important?" Archer and Marina exchanged glances. "We were discussing some possibilities for the future," Archer said carefully. "Good possibilities or scary possibilities?" Miles asked with the directness that only children possessed. "Good ones, I think," Marina said. "But complicated ones." Over breakfast, which consisted of cereal that Miles insisted on serving in his best bowls, the conversation continued in fits and starts. Archer found himself explaining his philosophy about wealth and responsibility, about the obligation that came with having more than you needed. Marina countered with her beliefs about self-reliance and the importance of earning what you had. "But Mom," Miles interjected at one point, "remember what you always tell me about accepting help when it's offered with a good heart." Marina looked at her son in surprise. "What?" "You always say that when Mrs. Chen from downstairs brings us extra food, or when the church gives us school supplies. I should say thank you and accept it gracefully, because refusing would hurt their feelings. You say that sometimes letting people help you is a way of helping them too." The wisdom in Miles' observation left both adults speechless for a moment. Finally, Archer spoke. "Your son is smarter than both of us," he said to Marina. "He gets that from his father," Marina replied, but she was smiling. "I get it from both of you," Miles said matter-of-factly. "Mom, why don't you want to accept Archer's help? He seems really nice, and he says you helped him a long time ago." Marina looked at her 7-year-old son, this child who had already learned to navigate complexity with grace and wisdom. "It's not that I don't want to accept help, baby. It's that I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of what it might mean. Scared of owing someone something I can't repay. Scared of what happens if things don't work out the way we hope. They will." Miles considered this seriously. "But Mom, aren't you already scared?" "You're scared every month when the rent is due. You're scared when I get sick and you have to miss work. You're scared when the car makes funny noises. Maybe being scared of good things is better than being scared of bad things." And the simplicity of his logic was devastating in its accuracy. Marina had been living with fear for so long that she'd forgotten there were different kinds of fear, and that some fears were worth facing while others were worth avoiding. "What do you think I should do?" she asked her son. "I think you should trust Archer the same way you trusted me to talk to him at the bus stop," Miles said. "You taught me that sometimes you have to take a chance on people who seem good, even if you don't know them very well." Archer watched this exchange with growing admiration for both mother and son. Miles had an emotional intelligence that far exceeded his years, and Marina had clearly done an extraordinary job raising him despite the challenges they faced. The more he learned about their life together, the more certain he became that his instinct to help them was right. "Marina," he said quietly, "what if we started smaller? What if instead of buying you a house right away, I helped you find a better apartment? Somewhere safer, with more space, in a better school district for Miles. We could call it a company housing allowance, part of your compensation package." Marina was quiet for a long time, turning her coffee mug in her hands. "Why is this so important to you?" she asked finally. "Because 15 years ago you saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself," Archer replied. "Tonight, I see potential in you and Miles that I don't think you fully recognize. You're both extraordinary people who deserve extraordinary opportunities. And because," he continued, "I've spent the last 15 years building a company, but I've never built a family. I've never had anyone to care about beyond myself. Helping you isn't just about repaying a debt. It's about finally having something that matters more than profit margins and stock prices." Marina's eyes filled with tears. "You're talking about us like we're family." "Aren't we, in a way?" Archer asked. "We're connected by something that happened a long time ago, something that changed both our lives. Maybe that's what family really is, people who are connected by love and history and mutual care." Miles had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement. "Does this mean Archer is going to be like my uncle?" he asked. Marina laughed through her tears. "I don't know what this means yet, baby, but I think it means good things." As the morning progressed, they worked out the practical details. Marina would start at Quantum Solutions in 2 weeks, giving her time to give proper notice at her current jobs. Archer would arrange for her to meet with the Human Resources Director and several department heads to determine the best fit for her skills and interests. The starting salary would be enough for her to afford a much better apartment, and after 6 months, if everything worked out well, they would revisit the question of a house. "I have one condition," Marina said as they finalized the arrangements. "What's that?" "I want to earn this. I don't want to be given a made-up job or treated differently because of our history. If I'm going to work for your company, I want to actually contribute something valuable." "Deal," Archer said without hesitation. "But I have a condition too." "Okay." "I want to be part of Miles's life, not as a replacement for his father, but as someone who cares about him and wants to watch him grow up. I want to be the person he calls when he needs help with homework or wants to talk about his dreams for the future." Marina looked at Miles, who was nodding enthusiastically. "I think we can arrange that," she said. Before leaving that morning, Archer did something he hadn't done in years. He got down on one knee so he was at Miles's eye level, and he made the boy a promise. "Miles," he said, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter how things work out with your mom's job or anything else, you will never have to sit alone at a bus stop again. If you ever need anything, if you're ever scared or cold or lonely, you call me, okay?" Miles threw his arms around Archer's neck in a hug that nearly knocked him over. "Okay," he said. "And Archer, thank you for not walking past the bus stop. Thank you for sitting with me." "Thank you for letting me," Archer replied. 6 months later, Archer stood in the backyard of a modest but beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. Marina was inside, directing the movers as they brought in furniture for what she still couldn't quite believe was actually her home. Miles was running around the yard with a golden retriever puppy that Archer had surprised him with as a housewarming gift, both of them covered in mud and grinning from ear to ear. Marina had proven to be everything Archer had hoped she would be at Quantum Solutions. She'd started in human resources, but had quickly shown a talent for understanding what employees needed to be happy and productive. Within 3 months, she'd been promoted to Director of Employee Relations, and her initiatives had already reduced turnover by 30%. More importantly, she'd brought a humanity to the company culture that had been missing for years. "You know what I realized?" Marina said, joining Archer on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee. "What's that?" "That night when Miles was waiting at the bus stop, I was so focused on getting to him that I never stopped to think about what would have happened if you hadn't been there. Not just that night, but in general. What would have happened to us if we'd never had this chance?" "You would have figured it out," Archer said with certainty. "You always do." "Maybe," Marina said, "but it would have been harder, and it might have taken a lot longer." They watched Miles play with the puppy, both of them marveling at how much could change in such a short time. The boy who had waited patiently in the cold was now running through his own backyard, secure in the knowledge that he was loved and safe, and that his future was bright with possibilities. "I've been thinking about something," Archer said. "About what Miles asked that first night, about why people help each other. What conclusion did you come to?" "I think we help each other because we recognize ourselves in other people's struggles. When I saw Miles at that bus stop, I saw myself 15 years ago, waiting for someone to believe in me. When you helped me at the diner, maybe you saw something of your own experience in my desperation." "Maybe," Marina agreed. "Or maybe we help each other because that's what makes us human. Because the alternative, walking past someone who needs help, is too awful to consider. Either way," Archer said, "I'm grateful it works the way it does." As the sun set over their new neighborhood, casting long shadows across the yard where Miles played, Archer reflected on how profoundly his life had changed. He still ran Quantum Solutions, still made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers. But now he had a reason beyond profit for wanting the company to succeed. He had people to come home to, people who cared about his day and shared their own joys and concerns with him. Miles had started calling him Uncle Archer, a title that filled him with more pride than any business award ever had. Marina had become not just an employee, but a trusted advisor and dear friend. Together, the three of them had created something that felt like family, bound not by blood, but by choice and mutual care. The puppy, exhausted from playing, curled up at Miles' feet as the boy sat in the grass, looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Archer and Marina joined him, all three of them lying on their backs in the soft grass, pointing out constellations and making wishes on the first stars of the evening. "Uncle Archer," Miles said, his voice drowsy with contentment, "do you think my dad would be happy about all this?" Archer looked at Marina, who nodded encouragingly. "I think your dad would be incredibly proud of the man you're becoming and incredibly grateful that your mom found a way to give you all the opportunities you deserve. I think he'd be happy knowing you're safe and loved, and that you have people in your life who believe in your dreams." "That's what I think too," Miles said, satisfied with the answer. As they lay there under the stars, Archer thought about the chain of events that had brought them together. A failed business meeting, a walk through empty streets, a child waiting patiently for his mother, a conversation that had unlocked a 15-year-old memory. Each moment had seemed random at the time, but together they had created something beautiful and lasting. He thought about the slice of apple pie that had changed his life, about the faith of a tired waitress who had seen potential in a desperate young man. He thought about the way kindness could ripple outward through time, creating connections and possibilities that might never have existed otherwise. "Marina," he said softly, not wanting to disturb Miles, who was nearly asleep in the grass, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met? Either time? All the time?" She admitted. "But then I remember what I used to tell Miles when he was smaller and worried about things that might go wrong. I'd tell him that wondering about different endings to our story is like wishing we were different people. And I like who we are, all of us, right now, in this moment. Even with all the struggles you've been through, even with everything you've had to sacrifice, especially because of those things," Marina said. "They're part of what made us who we are. They're part of what brought us here." Miles had fallen asleep between them, one hand resting on the puppy's fur, his face peaceful in the starlight. Marina gently lifted him and carried him inside to his new bedroom, with its race car bed and shelves full of books, and a window that looked out over the backyard where he could play safely. When she returned, Archer was still lying in the grass, looking up at the sky. She settled beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood, settling in for the night. "I have something to tell you," Archer said eventually. "What's that?" "I've decided to step back from day-to-day operations at Quantum Solutions. I'm promoting my VP to CEO and staying on as chairman of the board." Marina turned to look at him in surprise. Why? The company is more successful than ever. Because I finally understand the difference between success and fulfillment, Archer said. I have spent 15 years building a company, and now I want to spend the next 15 years building a life. I want to be here for Miles' school plays and soccer games. I want to help you with whatever dreams you decide to pursue next. I want to be present for the CA, people who matter most to me. Are you sure about this? Marina asked. I've never been more sure of anything, Archer replied. That night at the bus stop, when I sat down next to Miles, I wasn't just helping him. I was saving myself from a life that had everything except the things that actually matter. They sat together until late into the night, making plans for the future and marveling at the strange and wonderful ways that life could surprise you. When they finally went inside, Archer paused in the hallway outside Miles' room, listening to the sound of the boy's steady breathing. "Sweet dreams, buddy," he whispered, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. In the months that followed, their unusual family continued to grow and thrive. Archer kept his promise to step back from the company, though he remained involved in major decisions and strategic planning. Marina flourished in her new role, eventually becoming VP of Human Resources and implementing programs that made Quantum Solutions one of the most employee-friendly companies in the tech industry. Miles excelled in his new school, making friends easily and throwing himself into every activity from science club to Little League baseball. True to his word, Archer was there for every game, every school event, every important moment in the boy's life. He taught Miles to ride a bike in their backyard, helped him with homework at the kitchen table, and listened patiently to his dreams about becoming an astronaut or a veterinarian, or possibly both. One evening, nearly a year after that life-changing night at the bus stop, the three of them were having dinner together when Miles made an announcement. "I've been thinking about something," he said with the serious tone he used when he was working through a complex idea. "What's that, buddy?" Archer asked. "I think we should write a book about our story, about how you and Mom met at the diner, and how you found me at the bus stop, and how we all became a family." Marina smiled. "That's an interesting idea. What would we call this book?" Miles thought for a moment. "How about the night everything changed? Because that's what happened. One night changed everything for all of us." "I like that title," Archer said. "But who would we write it for?" "For other people who are waiting at bus stops," Miles said simply. "For people who think nobody cares about them, or people who have money but no family, or people who need help but are scared to ask for it. We could tell them that sometimes good things happen when you least expect them, and that helping each other is what makes people happy." As Archer looked across the dinner table at Miles and Marina, at these two people who had transformed his life in ways he was still discovering, he realized that the boy was right. Their story wasn't just about them. It was about the power of human connection, about the way small acts of kindness could ripple outward to create profound change, about the truth that sometimes the most important things in life came not from careful planning, but from the courage to pay attention to what mattered most. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. "And I think you should be the one to write it." "Really?" Miles asked, his eyes lighting up. "Really? After all, you're the one who brought us all together. If you hadn't been brave enough to wait at that bus stop, if you hadn't been wise enough to trust a stranger, none of this would have happened." That night, as he tucked Miles into bed, Archer marveled at how much his definition of wealth had changed. A year ago, he had measured his success in dollars and market share, in quarterly reports and stock prices. Now he measured it in bedtime stories and family dinners, in the sound of laughter echoing through the house, and the knowledge that he was part of something larger and more meaningful than any corporation could ever be. "Uncle Archer," Miles said, as Archer reached for the light switch, "do you think other people have stories like ours?" "I think everyone has a story," Archer replied. "I think the world is full of people waiting at bus stops, metaphorically speaking, and full of people who have the power to sit down beside them. The trick is recognizing those moments when they happen, and being brave enough to do something about them, Miles added. Exactly. As Archer walked downstairs to join Marina for their evening cup of coffee and conversation about the day's events, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. It had started with a piece of pie and a word of encouragement from a tired waitress to a desperate young entrepreneur. It had continued with a successful businessman choosing to sit beside a lonely child instead of walking past. And it had culminated in something that none of them could have imagined, but all of them had needed. A family built not on obligation but on choice, not on convenience but on love. The house was quiet now, except for the gentle sound of the dishwasher and the distant hum of traffic. But it was a good quiet, the kind that came from contentment rather than loneliness. Outside, the neighborhood was settling in for the night, families in houses up and down the street going through their own evening routines, tucking their own children into bed, making their own plans for tomorrow. And in one house on a tree-lined street were a tech CEO, a former waitress, and a wise 7-year-old boy had created something beautiful together. 3 people who had found each other through chance and kindness were building the kind of life that money couldn't buy, but love could create. It was, Miles would later write in the book, that would touch millions of lives. Exactly the kind of ending that proved sometimes the best stories were the ones that were too good to be fiction, too meaningful to be coincidence, and too important not to share with the world. The story of the millionaire CEO who saw a little boy sleeping at a bus stop had become the story of how strangers could become family, how kindness could compound over time, and how the most valuable investments were always the ones made in other people's hearts. And every night, as they gathered around their dinner table or sat together in their backyard watching Miles play with his dog, they were reminded that the greatest wealth wasn't what you accumulated, but what you shared, and the most successful life wasn't measured by what you achieved alone, but by what you built together with the people you chose to love.